Hello everyone, I'm Kavines Nair ANANTHAN and my metric number is 282906. Today we're going to see about ratios of Sime Darby Berhad. Before that, let's see about the Sime Darby Berhad's background. Sime Darby Berhad is a Malaysian trading conglomerate. Its a core business operate and serve in the industrial, motors and logistics sectors as well as the healthcare and insurance segments. In October 1910, British businessmen William Sime and Henry Darby established Sime Darby and a co-fledgling player in the lucrative rubber industry. The company later diversified to cultivating palm oil and cocoa and meat with enormous success. At the time of the company founding, William Middleton Sime was only 37-old, Scottish adventurer and fortune seeker. He had two fields behind him, one in export-import business and other in coffee plantations. When he left his job as a mercantile assistant in Singapore, Henry Darby was a wealthy 50-year-old English banker who owned property in northern Malaysia. Now let's move into the ratios of Sime Darby Berhad. Let's go. Now we are in liquidity ratio. Under liquidity ratio, there is current ratio. The formula of current ratio is current asset divided by current liabilities. The current ratio evaluates an organization's capacity to satisfy transient responsibility that are expected inside a year. The latest current ratio that given in the graph and the table below shows a declining trend from 2018 to 2019, that is from 2.708 to 2.662. Then the ratio had slightly increased from 2019 to 2020, that is 2.662 to 2.830. A proportion that more noteworthy that 1.0 demonstrates the organization has the monetary assets to stay dissolvable temporarily. From the table, we can conclude that the current asset and current liabilities of Sime Darby Berhad increasing every year. Now we are in acid test ratio. The formula of acid test ratio is current asset subtract with inventories then divided with current liabilities. The acid test ratio otherwise called as a quick proportion. It is a liquidity proportion that evaluates an organization's capacity to cover the present liabilities with the transition resources. From the graph and the table below, we can see that the acid test ratio indicates a declining trend from 2018 to 2019. That is 1.923 to 1.771. Then there is a slight increase from 2019 to 2020, that is 1.771 to 1.964. From this, we can know that the ratio of a greater than 1.0 shows an organization has the monetary assets to stay dissolvable for the time being. Now we are in cash ratio. Cash ratio formula is cash and cash equivalents divided by current liabilities. The cash asset ratio is a liquidity indicator that measures a company's ability to repay short-term debt obligations with the cash and cash equivalents. From the graph and the table below, we can see that the cash ratio indicates a declining from 2018 to 2019, that is from 0.773 to 0.16997. Then the ratio has slightly increased from 2019 to 2020, that is from 1.667 to 1.7712 in 2020. From this cash ratio, we can conclude that the company ratio is less than 1.0, that indicating that it does not have a sufficient liquid asset to meet its short-term liabilities. The firm should be approached with precaution in cash ratio in the future.
My name is NURMUZZALIEFAH binti ASMADY. My metric number 277505. I will be presenting leverage ratio. First of all, the debt ratio. The debt ratio is calculated by dividing total liability with total asset. For Sime Darby Berhad debt ratio in 2018 and 2019, it stayed the same at 0.1, and in 2020, it increased to 0.44. This showed that their total debt is lower than their total asset, and they can pay their debt. Next, debt to equity ratio. Debt to equity ratio can be calculated by dividing total liabilities to shareholder equity. In 2018, debt to equity ratio for Sime Darby Berhad was at 0.20. Then it decreased to 0.17. But in 2020, it increased to 0.26. This showed that majority of the company assets are financed by its own money. Next, asset to equity ratio. Asset to equity ratio can be calculated by dividing total asset to total liabilities. Sime Darby Berhad asset to equity ratio in 2018 and in 2019 stayed the same at 1.6 times. Then it increased to 1.77 in 2020. This indicates that the company is taking on less debt to purchase or to buy their asset.
Hi, my name is IRFAN bin ABDUL and my metric number is 264102. So I will present about asset turnover ratio. So for the 2018, 2019 and 2020, it has a net sale or average total assets, and for the 2018, the average turnover ratio can be seen as a 0.0412, and at the 2019 it slightly decreased on 0.0380, and on the 2020 the asset turnover ratio a little bit increased on 0.0400. Next, I will present about inventory turnover. Inventory turnover, its formula can be said as a cost of goods sold divided by average inventory. So there's 3 year in a inventory turnover. There is a 2018, 2019 and 2020. So on how we calculate the inventory turnover, we just take the cost of goods sold divide by average inventory. So for 2018, the inventory turnover its data is 0.176, and for the 2019 the data is 0.158, the ratio. And so lastly, for 2020 the ratio is 0.360.
I want to talk about profitability ratios. The first one is return on asset ratio. Return on asset ratio is net income divided by total assets. As you can see, the table and graph shows the return on assets of ratio of Sime Darby Berhad. Return on resources is type of profit from speculation metric that looks at an organization's benefit to its complete resources. This proportion looks at an organization's benefit or total compensation to the cash it has put resources into resource for decide how well it is getting along. The return on asset ratio indicates a decreasing trend from 2018 to 2019 and 2020. This company's ratio is less than 1.0, including that it does not have sufficient liquid assets to meet its short-term liabilities. Next is return on equity ratio. Return on equity ratio is net income divided by shareholders' equity. Shareholders' equity is total asset minus total liabilities. As you can see, the graph shows the return on equity ratio of Sime, Darby, Berhad. Return on equity is rate that address an organization yearly return, partitioned by the worth of its absolute investors' value. Gap the association profit development rate by its income degree of consistency. To get the profit from speculation, since its joint pay articulation and the monetary record were